And his games with black have just been atrocious. One game only with black has he won.
Wow.
That's insane to think about.
Magnus has one win with black.
One
and
win
you
with
think
black.
how enterprisingly he's been playing.
I think that's part of the problem. His openings with black have not been solid, and we see one here that is very solid. I think he's decided the whole strategy of playing that kind of crazy, wild opening. Maybe I should have been playing solidly with black from the very beginning.
Exactly.
And not losing all those games.
Exactly.
And sometimes it wasn't just solid, it was passive, like the Bogo Indian or the Perk, things where he didn't get as much active play.
Exactly. He decided to go ultra solid now. You'll recall, of course, in November of last year, in the famous match of London between Fabi and Magnus, this line of the Queen's Gambit with Bishop f4 was the rage between the two of them. Black has not yet committed his bishop to b7, and in this particular setup, the bishop actually, in my view, belongs on the e6 square. I like it there.
Why?
It's strange. You really are supporting a queenside expansion.
And there it is.
With the move c5, c4, as well as a5, a4, knight b4. And the bishop on b7 does a great job at defending d5, but it doesn't help you hit out on the queenside. And again, knight b4, a5, but the kinds of moves that with the bishop on e6 just lends a little helping hand for some pressure.
I know that for a lot of amateur players, it is awkward or counterintuitive to stick a bishop on e6 because in so many cases, knight g5 bothers you. But here we have that raw.
With the move bishop e7 covering. So you're saying that for a lot of amateur players, they're reluctant to put the bishop on e6 because of the move knight g5. But yes.
Or they're just used to it blocking a pawn. It's not as typical of a development move for many people, especially when you've played b6.
Right. Now, from Black's point of view, the problem is he'd like to play the move rook c8 and knight b4. Rook c8 walks into bishop a6, and keep in mind this bishop on f4 covers the c7 square, so that would actually cost the exchange. So the move a5 is very useful type of move. You want to be able to play a4 and knight b4, and again, I was mentioning that bishop on e6 does support as c5, c4. h3, g6. Now, g6 is a surprise move for me. I would have been more thinking I'm going to make luft with h6 rather than g6. So a very different approach by Magnus. Now, from White's point of view, well, White's got to get his act together, and usually he does it with the move knight e.
Well, he started with bishop b5, hinting at occupying that square.
Bishop b5. Yes, attacking the knight. Very straightforward idea. He's hoping to force the knight to move so that he could play knight e5. Again, rook c8 would have walked into bishop a6. Black is thinking he's going to put his queen on b7, and
he just took on c5, a very concrete decision, opening up the b file for black as well as he's opened the d file for himself.
How does knight d4 look here? Then there's just going to be I'm just trying to think of ways that I can take advantage of that pawn, the pin on c5.
He can drop a bishop back to d7 and guard.
I think after knight d4, can I take with the knight, pawn takes d4, and then play queen b7, just getting out of the pin along the c file?
He has played it. It's on the board.
So we'll see if...
I agree, though. I think that knight takes d4, pawn takes d4, queen b7 looks like the way.
Just to getting out of dodge,
Although
the c file.
The pin persists because we always have rook c7, right?
He has done.
So after a4, you still can't take on d4 because of after queen b7, a4. There's still that pesky rook c7 in the position.
So rook c8 competing for the c line has been played.
Rook on f to c8, knowing that the a8 rook is performing some kind of useful function, protecting the pawn on a5.
Those of you who remember Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky, Boris Spassky's black, rook f8 to c8.
Is this
Queen's Gambit decline variation.
How do you rate White's advantage here? Is it anything? Bishop d... Nothing. You think it's just nothing?
Nothing.
Okay.
You've got a majority on the queen side. Yay. But that majority, b3, a4, is completely controlled by the pawn on a5.
What about the weakness of a5? Like if I round it up with like bishop d2?
Well, the weird part is, what if black ever essays... Okay, that's why I didn't like the move g6. I like, as black, playing takes on d4, bishop to b4, then my a-pawn's not weak, right, anymore.
Takes d4 happen right now, by the way.
He did.
Yeah.
Okay, takes on... queen takes d4. So that's the problem with g6 is now you've got to keep an eye.
Hello.
Yeah, well, bishop h6 is indeed a hello. That
or
could be met by bishop f8,
or a bishop e5 followed by
bishop h8.
Yeah, and you still have bishop f8.
Well, I wanted to say if the pawn was on h6, a move like bishop b4 here would really cement the defense of the a-pawn. Now,
we see a trade on c1 and rook to c8 plays.
Rook c8, yeah.
All the rooks.
And the rooks all got hoovered off the board.
And then the bishop d2 move that I was angling for earlier, trying to highlight the weakness on a5 now that the rook is no longer on a8.
There's a little bishop c3 action as well, by the way.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the a-pawn as much as bishop c3 would, I find.
And f6 too weakening, you think, yeah?
Well,
not too weakening,
I'm going to have
the kind
to
of
do
weakness
it.
you want. You want to see black do something over there.
Like if I go queen c7, for example. Queen c7 to defend the pawn. Bishop c3, f6 is actually obliged.
Yeah,
There's no
exactly.
choice. So I'm thinking that queen c7, bishop c3, f6. You can play b4. Then you've got to pass a pawn.
Queen c7 has been played.
And I've got to pass d pawn. I still think we're still on the even side. But I reckon the a-pawn is more dangerous than the d-pawn. You know, in such positions, when you're trying to make an evaluation as to who stands better, a good one is, how about king position? Who has the safer king, and who has the more dangerous passer?
This looks good for white.
Yeah.
After b4 looks like a problem for Magnus.
Or starting with queen d2, also possible.
I like queen d2 as well.
And then
Queen d2, bishop
d8.
It's a little...
No, fine.
And b4 on the board. And once again, Magnus under pressure with the black pieces.
Which is weird.
It's so strange. Even when he tried to play solidly, he's under pressure. He's not succeeding. It's very strange indeed. This is white's position to win, as black is just under so much pressure here.
Well, again, it's the pass a-pawn is just a much more dangerous pawn. We can imagine the trade of bishops, and bishop b4, queen b4. The pawn's going to a5 to a6, and the pawn is not passing d4 so easily.
Not at all.
I mean,
and even d3 is covered. Even d2 will be covered. Meantime, that a-pawn is fast.
Well, let's imagine bishop b4, queen d8, a5, d4. Okay, you can see that after a6 I want to play d3, and then at least I've got a race going. I'm not saying that he's done it. I'm sure he's going to play something to get that d-pawn going. Queen a7, I'd be a little bit afraid that my queen was getting tied up. But I'm thinking he's going to play queen d8. We'll see in a moment. No, just king g7. Okay, so does he want to meet a5 with d4? a5, d4, a6. And like you said, Maurice, d3 is covered.
Yeah, and then the queen can go back to d2 if needed. If the pawn's on a6, you'll be
By the way, I didn't like this move, king g7, whatsoever. It also means that there's a queen e7 check. If your queen ever tries to... Yeah, if you want to get rambunctious with queen c1 check and queen f4 check kinds of ideas,
and that
there's an e7 check at the end.
Magnus is now under a minute.
Uh-oh.
This is looking bad for him, and he's not sure where to put his pieces.
Well, I believe he's considering d4, a6, queen a7. But then the bishop is going to move back to d3, and you better be alert to queen b7 check.
And plus he's got queen infiltration other ways as well. This is not good. He's down to 32 seconds. He's d4 on the board.
d4, a6 is we can expect. Expect a6. And we're Queen A7. At some point, you got to just block that pawn, and then Queen A7, Bishop D3, Bishop D5. I think Magnus is barely hanging in there.
Queen to
B6.
That allows a Queen
A4, Queen
what's
E7
Queen
check.
E7 check.
Queen
That's why I didn't like King G7.
Queen E7
Queen
check.
E7 check is
And there it is.
winning.
And now he can just push his pawn to A7,
Yeah.
and you're not stopping that guy.
It's got to be
Because
winning.
we also have Queen F8 check.
Absolutely.
air.
But how do you stop the pawn? The pawn.
I got Bishop D5.
You have to
Bishop
play-
D5.
you have to play
Luckily
Bishop
enough,
D5.
Bishop D5. So you could go A7, threatening the queen. Bishop D5 covers the threat, but you're just barely hanging on.
Can't I play Bishop C4 trying to deflect you and then put
Yes.
the Bishop on G8?
Yes, threatening a mate down there on the king side. You can also chase Black's king up the board with Queen F8
You can also
check.
just pick up a piece after Bishop C4, then
Well-
just play Queen F8 and Queen.
Well, no, I'm sorry, Jennifer.
That too?
Queen F8 check. If you
Oh.
go King G5, I go F4 check. So he's looking at a four
Yeah, that's
sequence of moves
a lot better. I
to
mean,
checkmate.
so
his opponent.
worst case scenario, we win a piece.
Yeah, but I think now F6 is covered. I think Queen F8 was a winner. I'm pretty sure
Bishop
A7 is a
Bishop
winner.
C4.
And Bishop C4, your move, Maurice, because Ding is looking at Bishop G8. Oh, this is over.
This is over.
Or Queen F8 and
Over.
Queens.
With
Over.
12 seconds on the clock, Magnus needs to do something. He plays Bishop to B7, and as we said, we could win the piece with Queen check and Queens.
Correct.
That's the minimum. Meantime, Maxime
breaking
Vachiligorov has won
news.
his game.
Well, he
and
just queened right
he
away.
just queened right away, saying, I'm going to
Same
get that
thing.
piece. Let me just go get it. And thank you very much. Your king's still exposed. Queen D5 check threats. That pawn is going nowhere. Magnus is hoping against hope. Here comes the queen. And he knows
resign.
this is lost. And Ding Liren just stabilizing the position with G3.
King G2's and
Oh,
H4.
boy.
And that's just, wow, that was just a terrible sequence there for Magnus. I don't think it seemed like he just didn't even have an awareness how bad his position could be.
Look, he's trying to trap that queen now with this move. And Queen and here that king is starting to look like
nice
he's in
little
trouble.
finesse there.
At some point, G4 will come if he can make it work. I would think King H3, F3,
Exactly.
G4 should
I
seal
was
the
about
deal
to say
somehow.
the same. Put the bishop on D5, King H3, F3, G4.
Little hesitancy by
Yeah.
Ding Liren
It's okay.
there.
It's okay. He hasn't spoiled anything with.
But he's only got 20 seconds.
Well, then he's got to speed things up just
Yeah,
a little
10,
bit.
Avoiding
10
this
seconds to
G4
20
idea.
seconds.
He's avoiding G4.
Now,
That
again,
seems
it's
weird.
He will.
It's 3-second delay.
He'll do
There's
that
no
eventually.
increment.
And now Queen F4 and Magnus with a check. Just keeping everything covered, Magnus is, and as he watches the time go down, and now H5 with the idea of playing H6 at some point.
Ooh, Queen H6.
And now H6 on the board. Daring him to play G5, Queen B8 would be very annoying. There it
That's
is
what
on
we're gonna
both
see.
moves on the board.
The Queen H8 is a winning threat there.
The pawn is under attack at the moment. Oh no, G4.
Just-
Boy,
Followed by
that's
Bishop takes F5.
Bishop takes F5 and H7.
Oh, he
pawn.
took with the pawn.
also looking
That's
good.
a surprise.
G4 on the board. Here comes the king. He's going to take that pawn.
Now remember that queen on B.
But the queen has left the F8 square. The queen has left the F8 square. This should be good, no?
Yeah, it's mate.
Yeah.
Why isn't the king in trouble? And Magnus realizing that this queen is creepy crawling.
There it is.
And it's going to be over.
That was one
Wow.
of the worst Blitz games I've ever seen Magnus play.
Magnus'
It really
resistance
is bad.
level is so low right now.
He's sucking.
2-0, Ding Liren, Magnus Carlsen, and